Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and look at an ancient catastrophe that completely rewrites everything we thought we knew about mythological gods and the collapse of empires. We're going to look at hard, undeniable scientific data right alongside ancient mythological texts. And honestly, when you layer them on top of each other, what we find is absolutely chilling. We're exploring an event that literally wiped the slates of humanity clean. And even crazier, we're looking at the very real, unsettling possibility that the people in charge knew it was happening, and they simply packed up and walked away.
So picture this. It's 2200 BCE, and every major civilization on Earth collapses simultaneously. And remember, these societies had absolutely zero contact with one another. Over in Egypt, the Old Kingdom, the very same civilization that built the Great Pyramids of Giza, just vanished into civil war and famine. The Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, which was the largest political entity the world had ever seen up to that point, it fell apart in a single generation. The Indus Valley Civilization, housing a staggering 10% of the entire human population, completely dispersed. Meanwhile, early dynastic China saw massive, catastrophic flooding and mass displacement. We are talking about the simultaneous collapse of basically everything that existed. Same century, totally different continents. So what on earth happened? Well, modern science calls the trigger the 4.2 Kiloyear event. This was a sudden, catastrophic global megadrought. And we're not just talking about a bad, dry summer. This was a massive planetary shift, and it's confirmed by ice cores drilled deep out of the Greenland ice sheet, cave mineral deposits in Oman, and lake sediment records across Africa, Asia, and South America. Every single independent geological archive tells the exact same story. The climate changed overnight, it lasted for 200 grueling years, and the ancient world just couldn't survive it. That's the accepted scientific explanation today. But here is where things get super fascinating. Take a look at how this modern scientific explanation lines up perfectly with the haunting Sumerian text written by the actual people who lived through it. On one hand, we've got the scientific data proving 200 years of severe global drought. But on the other hand, we have the Sumerian explanation from a text called the Lamentation over the Destruction of Ur. The Sumerians didn't just say, oh, the weather got bad. They said their gods called a meeting, literally a 3-year divine assembly where these gods actively debated and ultimately voted to abandon humanity. Sounds like pure myth, right? But when you lay this ancient poem against the archaeological record, you realize they are describing the exact same event, just from the inside.
To really wrap our heads around this chilling reality, we need to look at the physical evidence left behind in the dirt. Section 1. The empty temples of Ur and Woolley's discoveries.
Between 1922 and 1934, Sir Leonard Woolley conducted this massive excavation of the ancient city of Ur. And beneath the burned layers, beneath the collapsed walls from when the city was eventually sacked by invaders, his team found a highly specific, 3-step pattern of abandonment. First, the cult statues, which the Sumerians believed were the actual physical presence of their gods, were carefully removed from the inner sanctums. Second, all the administrative records, temple inventories, and accounting ledgers were completely packed up. And third, the temples were just emptied entirely. The physical layers in the ground, the stratigraphy, proved this all happened decades before the final destruction of the city.
The absolute most crucial takeaway here is that this was not chaotic looting. Think about it. When an empire weakens and looters rush in, it's total chaos. They smash things, they grab whatever's shiny and accessible, and they run. But what Woolley found in the dirt was the exact opposite of that. This was a highly authorized, planned withdrawal that would have required immense time, organized labor, and heavy resources. Someone with ultimate top-down authority systematically removed the most sacred items and important administrative records long before the enemy ever showed up at the gates.
And this builds a completely new, paradigm-shifting understanding of who these ancient beings really were. Section 2. The data behind the gods, the Anunnaki.
Now, whenever we read Sumerian texts, we constantly hear about the Anunnaki. Pop culture loves to paint them as these magical, mystical beings from the sky who could predict the future. But the Anunnaki weren't magical beings. The hard evidence actually requires us to view them more like an ancient class of corporate accountants. They were the central administrators of the most data-rich civilization in the world. They managed complex agricultural systems, they controlled the irrigation networks, and crucially, they held the central accounting records for every single grain surplus across the entire empire.
So, because they were the central administrators, just think about the kind of data they were sitting on. We're talking about 5 consecutive years of declining agricultural yields, consistently dropping irrigation water levels, and massive grain reserves that were depleting way faster than they could ever be replenished. Listen, these administrators didn't need divine prophecy or supernatural foresight to see the end of the world coming. They just had access to the central accounting data that your average farmer or local town official simply couldn't see. If you want to know if a society is collapsing, you don't need a crystal ball. You just look at the spreadsheets.
Which brings us right back to that ancient Sumerian lamentation text. Remember how it described a 3-year assembly of the gods? Well, if we view the Anunnaki as high-level administrators holding all this data, this ancient poem suddenly translates into what was essentially a 3-year corporate boardroom debate. A debate among the elite over whether to try and save the failing system or just cut their losses and abandon it entirely. The text records that in year 1, the goddess Ningal presents evidence that the city of has been faithful, arguing that the data shows they don't deserve destruction. In year 2, the high authority, named An, hears her out, agrees with her, but firmly refuses to reverse the decree. And by year 3, they hold a final assembly vote to pack up and abandon the city.
We actually have the exact words of Enlil, who is described as the operational commander of the Anunnaki. He straight up tells Ningal, the destruction of is the will of the assembly, and you must accept it. This chilling response proves that those with the most information decided the situation was totally terminal. They looked at the agricultural collapse, realized the civilization was past the point of no return, and they chose to protect themselves. They packed up their resources, their records, and they left. All while the rest of the population stayed behind in the dark, probably just hoping the crisis would blow over.
And this brilliantly illustrates why the goddess Ningal took one final, incredibly desperate action. Section 3, a warning for the future and Ningal's last act. The text tells us that right before Ningal fled, she moved through the temples giving very specific instructions. And it wasn't about which gold or jewels to save, it was about which written records to preserve. She couldn't save her city, but she made sure to distribute multiple copies of the administrative records into protected underground storage. Why? So future generations would know exactly how and why they were abandoned. It's as if she wanted whoever dug up the ruins centuries later to find the specific record that basically said, look, we knew this was coming. We were told it was inevitable. We disagreed, and we lost the vote. She made sure the minutes of that fateful meeting survived the apocalypse. Now here's a fact that will absolutely blow your mind. 90% of the clay tablets recovered from ancient Mesopotamia currently sit completely untranslated in museums in London, Philadelphia, Berlin, and Baghdad. Let that sink in. 90%. That means there are more than likely even more assembly minutes, more raw administrative records, and more desperate warnings from ancient scribes just waiting right now to be read. These people wrote these texts knowing their entire world was ending, purposefully leaving a message in a bottle for whoever came next.
So what happened after? Well, the 4.2 Kiloyear drought did eventually break. After a couple of centuries of devastation, new civilizations and empires like Babylon and Assyria rose up from the dust. The world rebuilt itself, because that's what the world always does. But Sumer? Sumer never came back. While everyone else eventually recovered, the Sumerian civilization was permanently erased, completely destroyed by leaders who could clearly predict the disaster through their data, but actively chose not to stop it. The Sumerian language actually went totally extinct as a spoken tongue within just 2 generations of the city's fall. It was wiped out.
So the physical dirt tells us they packed up. The translated texts tell us they voted to leave. We know for a fact they had the data, and we know they organized a massive systematic departure. But taking all of this in leaves us with one haunting, deeply unsettling question. Where did the gods go?